Hello everyone, today we are gonna be playing Nilou with the Hydro Tulpa as you can see, and with that let's get into the games. Ouch. And here we go with the first match against Chaska Whale with Shenhe. Now of course, if you aren't aware, in the latest patch the Dragon Chaska Whale deck got nerfed in a way that Chaska's bullets, when discarded from the deck and not from your hand, which of course the Pyro Dragon discards cards from your deck instead of your hand, it got nerfed so that Chaska's bullets do not actually activate their effect when they are discarded from the deck. So basically the patch notes, like, okay, we got new character cards, of course the Tulpa, I'm going to get to that in a second, but like the only balance changes were that the one very specific Chaska Whale dragon deck got nerfed, and that is the patch notes, like for the balance changes. Of course Whale's burst also got nerfed. Now it only activates once normally during the end phase instead of having that double activation. But that's enough about that. What we are actually here for is the Hydro Tulpa, and though I haven't actually played it in much decks, I do think Bloom is the #1 place to use Tulpa. Why? Firstly, it is a Hydro character, so you immediately have access to both Hydro Resonance cards, which are very good for Bloom decks. Secondly, its passive skill gives you Hydro Summon, which often with double Hydro Bloom decks, the problem usually is the fact that you are reliant on one Dendro character. Well, to put it more, you are more reliant on getting the Bloom cores themselves to actually stay on the field. That part can get a little tricky when you only have one character that can apply Dendro, and if that character gets sniped by the opponent, you often run into trouble with your Dendro cores being spent and you having no way of applying more Dendro on the opponent characters. But because Hydro Tulpa summons Hydro Summon, combine that with the Dendro core and you basically have an infinite Dendro core if the opponent or you doesn't do anything about it, because you're going to have the Dendro core and a Hydro Summon activate back to back. And lastly, of course, Hydro Tulpa's skill, which activates the end phase of one of your summons at random, of course dealing 2 Hydro damage. So when you only have Dendro summons on the field, like the Bloom core, combine it with this skill, and even without Nilou's talent card, that's going to be a 5 damage combo that immediately refreshes the usage on your Bloom core. Of course, the downside for the whole Tulpa activating a summon is the fact that it takes piercing damage to itself. But we'll get to the Tulpa gameplay of this deck in a moment. As you saw there, the starting with this deck is very simple. We of course are having Stove card here as the arcane card to fish Nilou's talent card, and what you want to do round 1 is Baisu skill and ramp if you have bad dice. If you have good dice, go to Nilou, fish for Nilou talent and use that, because Baisu skill plus Nilou, that's 3 actions in total, because skill from Baisu, switch, skill from Nilou. Usually round 1 against most decks, that's a guaranteed Bloom. But even if you do not get that, you are going to see here that there are other options what you can do. But yeah, like I said, round 1 you want Baisu skill, Nilou skill with talent if you get the talent, like I do here. And if you have terrible dice and you don't want to tune your hand cards, then ramp with Sing Your Heart Out or other cards you run in the deck for that. You can of course replace these for Libens, for example, if that is your cup of tea. We are running Maidens in this deck because of course Baisu's burst and skill both heal the active character, as well as Hydro Tulpa's summons, when they leave the field, they heal Hydro Tulpa for 2 HP. So actually running Maidens in this deck is very strong, because you get quite a lot of value from it. Of course, not to mention we have the Hydro Resonance heals, which can also activate Maidens. But you see here, well, I kind of speeded through that, but when Baisu's summon disappeared from the field, that activated the Tulpa's passive skill, which is when you have enough HP and all your summons apart from half Tulpa leave the play, meaning everything that isn't this summon leaves the play, you summon one of half Tulpas on the field, as you saw here. But actually the funny thing, like, I don't know if it's because Bloom is kind of like, well, Nilou Bloom cores are kind of like a special thing. Like, I'm not exactly sure, because I've only played Hydro Tulpa with Bloom decks. I have not played Hydro Tulpa in any other deck, so I'm not actually quite sure, but playing Hydro Tulpa in Bloom decks only, it seems to me that the Tulpa's passive skill activates every time when one summon leaves the field. It might be just because in this deck's case, I might be confused, because the Dendro cores are kind of like a special summon from Nilou's skill, and that's why the Hydro Tulpa's passive skill doesn't consider them to be normal summons, and instead of treats them like Dendro cores, which means Baisu's elemental skill summon is the only summon apart from half Tulpas on the field, meaning that when Baisu's summon disappears from the field, it activates the Tulpa's passive skill. And if that's indeed the case, like mentioned, I have not tried Tulpa in any other deck except Bloom, because I think it is the best to use in Bloom and nowhere else. If it's that way, then that just goes to show that Tulpa truly is best used in Bloom decks. But I would like to give a quick shout out to another deck that I do think Tulpa is actually pretty good with or in, and that is Wolf Lord decks. Because of course Hydro Tulpa plus Wolf Lord with Talent card, that's quite a lot of damage, quite a lot of protection for half Tulpa, which of course, not half Tulpa, Hydro Tulpa, which of course suffers from the quick depletion of HP because of the skill and the passive talent. But yeah, basically, I don't think there's any point playing, let's put it like that, I don't think there's any point playing Tulpa, for example, with Xiangling, because Xiangling plus Tulpa skill, if you have Kuba on the field, you know, you summon Kuba, you go to Hydro Tulpa, you do a skill with Hydro Tulpa, that's going to be what, 6 damage. Yeah, sure, excellent combination of damage, but you can get the exact same amount of damage if you have Nilou with Talent card and Dendro Core on the field. If now Hydro Tulpa skill activates Dendro Core when you have Nilou's Talent card, that's a 6 damage combo. And you know, if you are playing Nilou in a Bloom deck, you should always run Nilou's Talent card, because this is just good. Increases the damage of Bountiful Cores by 1. And this is what I also meant with Hydro Tulpa being able to provide Hydro summons being good. You see here, when we end our round, we are guaranteed another Bloom here. Because you can see we have Hydro, we have Dendro, that's a guaranteed Bloom. After all, I mean, they are, like, you know, CC mages can actually cleanse Hydro, or, well, the Cryo one cannot even cleanse Dendro from themselves, but you quite easily, well, no, put it simply, the opponent cannot get rid of that infinite Dendro Core if they don't have something like a send off or directional blast or the shower card, which like these days almost no one uses any of those.
Couldn't transcend.
So you're quite good, quite safe playing Nilou Bloom these days, because you know no one runs send off or anything. Some people might have like one copy of it, but most people do not even bother. Here you see we of course play the mainless Beloved because we have the Macaronis, which is very good combo with Maidens. And here you see the Hydro Health Tulpa disappears, it heals the Hydro Tulpa for 2 HP. And now our opponent is in quite a bit of trouble. They do not have enough HP for that whale to stay alive for very long. Not to mention, now I know they have 0 cryo bullets in hand, so there's no fear of a sudden freeze to my characters. Though of course all of my characters are going to be affected by the Hydro, but because of the lingering Aeon and my Dendro Cores, the whale is already dead. And with that, let's move on to the next match. And here we have our next match. Farusan, I don't remember how to pronounce that name. Farusan? Yes, Farusan. Farusan against, Farusan Fatui deck. Basically reliant on getting the Fatui resonance and having something that isn't Pyro coming out of it. A very strong deck, though hasn't seen much use lately in Pro tournament play, at least for what I've seen. But yeah, the game plan with this deck, let's actually go over that. So like mentioned earlier, Baisu skill as you saw here, switch to Nilou, fish for the talent card, hopefully get the talent card, play the talent card, and the last dice you have left you can spend it on setup or switching off from Nilou if the opponent is playing an aggressive deck. Of course here I know what that deck is about. They definitely have Covenant of Rock in hand, because that deck uses Covenant of Rock. So I actually decide to stay on Nilou, because I know they cannot take out Nilou this round, and I can just simply switch to Tulpa or Baisu to keep Nilou alive. After all, they have no cards in hand, so the likelihood of them getting Anemo Resonance cards to increase the swirl damage to, you know, take out Nilou would be very small. But yeah, anyway, round 2, after you have done Nilou's skill, if the situation is good, go back to Baisu and resummon with Baisu, because usually this is like the start of round 2 looks like this. You are on Nilou, you have 1 bountiful core, and you have half Tulpa in play. This is like what usually it looks like. Okay? Exceptions are if the opponent doesn't actually switch characters, because in that case you end up with only half Tulpa. But let's not bother with that. This is the usual what you get for round 2. What you want to do from here is actually go to Baisu like this, because you want to have 2 Dendro summons on the field before you go to Tulpa, in order to increase the chance of Tulpa's skill actually activating one of the Dendro summons instead of the Hydro half Tulpa. Here of course, because our opponent is going to do a lot of damage, I instead go for a Baisu Burst for a little bit of extra protection. Even though basically right there we waste 1 HP that we could have gained from the Baisu's Burst. And of course we ran out of dice here, but they lose Farusan, and now you see once again the Dendro Core disappears, and that does activate, you know, Tulpa's passive skill, even though we have the Baizu's summon on the field, and this is like what I was talking about, this is a little odd. I don't know, because this is all your summons apart from half Tulpa leaf play. So I'm guessing actually what, maybe this is worded badly, maybe it means all as in any other. You know, all your summons as in any other summon apart from half Tulpa leaves play. I think this is what it actually is supposed to like mean. That's at least my guess. It's supposed to say all other summons except when any other summon except half Tulpa leaves play, you summon a half Tulpa once per round. It's a little confusing, but to put it simply, when you lose a summon that isn't a half Tulpa, you are going to summon one half Tulpa. Of course, with Bloom decks it is not ideal to have too many half Tulpas, because this means the Hydro Tulpa isn't going to activate your Bloom cores to maximize the damage you do. Which is, of course, I think it is the Blessing of Am card. We are having them in the deck, but we unfortunately do not get them into our hand here. They are somewhere there at the bottom. Here we unfortunately do not get lucky with the Bountiful Core activation, which means, well, Tulpa is almost dead, but luckily the Baizu Shield finishes the job. Now here we are of course afraid of a Nemo Resonance, because that increases the swirl damage, and Nilou being on low HP and Lynette having Tandoori Chicken. It is quite scary, so we play a bunch of healing to make sure Nilou stays alive. Like so. And in the end we opt for just a normal attack, because I don't want to tune the last of my cards. Of course, it's not big of a deal, since our summons are going to finish the job here. And with that, let's get into the next game.
What detail did I miss?
And here we have our next game. This match actually against Varesa Plunge deck. And it's actually been funny ever since Albedo's talent card got buffed. And especially now that Albedo is 12 HP. We've actually seen a rise of Albedo Plunge deck, because ever since the Albedo's talent card got buffed to the version it is now, that it is -1 dice, and actually our opponent from my memory plays it right here at the beginning, so I can actually talk about it a little before we get into the match. But ever since Albedo's talent card, if I remember correctly, at first it was simply that your plunge attacks deal +1 damage. But it was later buffed to the current version, where its plunge attacks cost 1 less unaligned element and deal 1 extra damage. Like the original only had, in my memory, the +1 damage. But ever since that buff, Albedo Plunge decks have actually been like a legitimate strategy to use. But ever since Albedo got buffed to 12 HP, Ayaka's passive skill got buffed so that the basically plunging attacks, but not really plunging attacks, deal +1 damage. I've actually seen it in tournament level play, like professional players actually have used Albedo Plunge decks, so this is actually, you could call that almost a meta. Actually, I think that is a meta deck. Though I personally still prefer versions with double Mondstadt characters, because Mondstadt Resonance in Albedo Plunge decks is just extremely good, but not meaning to say that deck isn't good either. We are going to see here. It is quite strong indeed. Of course, Varesa also now with having that +1 to plunging attacks, normal attack, very, very strong. Especially with Albedo, and I actually do think my next video is going to be with Varesa. But enough about that. You can see we go for the normal rotation here, but our opponent having the freeze, which is actually able to avoid the Bloom Core round 1. And here you see Baisu summon summons as a half Tulpa. And this is, well actually let's get over the dice rolls first, then I'll say what I meant to say. This right here, what you see, this is like the second most common. If your opponent avoids the Dendro Core round 1, this is what you will look like. You often start first in those scenarios. The opponent will most likely be affected by Dendro, and you will have half Tulpa on the field. This is like the second most likely start of round 2, and in this scenario going for Nilou skill again is perfectly fine. Like, you don't need to do the Baisu rotation. Here you can actually Nilou skill, Baisu skill, and not even go to half Tulpa. Actually, here a quick mention, we are in this match and in the previous 2 matches I'm running half Tulpa's talent card because I thought it would be quite funny if we ran into any I did run into a whale deck, but I didn't get to play this card, and we didn't run into any newly installed decks where this card would be extremely funny to have. But using Tulpa's talent card, I'd say this is only really good if you want to only get the half Tulpa on the field. Basically, if you want a cheap Hydro summon, then running Tulpa's talent card is a viable option. But in other cases, like in this deck, you could very well use Baisu's talent card instead of the Tulpa's talent card to satisfy the conditions for the stove card to look for a talent card round 1. And secondly, we are running 1 copy of Feldragon's Awakening. You can run 2 copies, whichever you prefer. I'm only running 1 copy because it's going to take a while anyway to get the stacks with this deck. You know, Baisu's skill being like the most biggest contribution for the extra damage stacks, and for the usage we only have Opera Epic Lair and Weeping Willow. No, well, of course we also have People of Springs. But like mentioned earlier, we can redo a Nilou skill here. Of course, playing the People of Springs to immediately get 2 stacks of the Bountiful Core for it to be a bigger threat, because when you have 2 or more stacks, when you declare the end of your round, 1 stack immediately activates.
The doctor will see you now.
And like mentioned there, Nilou skill plus Baisu skill completely fine if you only have half Tulpa in play, and you can with that Nilou skill you can immediately get the Dendro Core. Now here, as you can see, our opponent's deck is actually very strong. They still have 3 dice. The damage they are doing is really high. It is not actually looking good for us, because you can see we only have 13 HP total. And once the end phase is over, it's going to be 12, while they still have 13, so they have the HP lead. Not to mention, against summon decks, a deck that can do a bunch of damage during the round is of course the best counter. Which also you should remember if you end up playing this deck yourself. Any deck like Chlorine decks, Albedo Plunge deck, any deck that does a bunch of damage during the round and not in the end phase, they are most likely going to beat you. But any deck like a mid-range stall decks, against those you are at the advantage. I mean, the Dragon and Tulpa skill do allow you to help you a little bit to beat those aggressive decks. Like you can see here, we are close. But even now, Ayaka has enough HP that no matter which of our summons activates, Ayaka is going to stay alive. And they still have 6 dice. After playing food card, they are back to 7 dice. And here they got the heal off, meaning that I couldn't even do the, end your round and the Dendrocore snipes a Yaga trick. And now you can see they can burst a Yaga. That basically means I'm already out of the game because they have enough dice, and just to like add insult to injury, they even have gamblers in hand. So there's really nothing I can do at this point. They can even simply switch characters, which they are actually going for here. Because this means that my summons aren't going to be able to finish off the opponent's characters. But yeah, this is to show against aggressive decks that do a bunch of damage during the round, you are most likely going to lose. I mean, you can see here 1 HP difference though. So it was close in this match. On to the next one. Now, in this next match, our deck is actually a little bit different. You noticed in the last games I was using macaronis and chef mouse and whatnot. My first version of this deck was actually a little bit more included a bit more survivability, but in this version of the deck I've done a little bit of changes. We are now running surfing buddies as well instead of macaronis, and we've also replaced chef mouse with Baranaras and other cards in order to make a more aggressive version of the same deck. Because that's actually a nice part about this deck. Like, depending on what cards you play, you can actually make it more of a mid-range store deck with macaronis and whatnot, or with surfing buddies and other similar summon activation cards. You can actually make it more of an aggressive deck.
Anything I can help you with?
Also in this match, this was actually when I first read Varesa's skill description. What you see here, like this character combination, was the first one that came to mind. But after some contemplation, it is not actually the deck I'm going to be trying out in my next video, but you'll just have to wait and see. So you see here we do get the Tulpa's talent card, but unfortunately once again in this match there's basically no reason to play it. Of course, the downside also is that we did not get Nilou's talent card here. So our bountiful cores do a little less damage.
Time for a house call.
So we get less value from Opera Epiclay. Not that it would have mattered since they have quite a bunch of equipment themselves, our opponent here. A weapon on Varisa, actually one of the things that I do think could work very well, but with such a version that my opponent is playing, like Albedo's talent card increases the plunge damage done by Varesa, Janssen's burst increases the plunge damage done by Varesa. I don't really think a weapon is exactly necessary in a deck like that. But you see here we did the standard rotation.
Experiment.
And it works out very well even without Nilou's talent card. We already have taken out one of the opponent's characters. Our card luck, not the greatest, but at least we have the blessing of M, so that we can, for example, get rid of the Hydro Tulpa on the field for a quick couple dice and HP for... No, wait, not the Hydro Tulpa, we can get rid of the Half Tulpa for a little bit of HP and dice if we need to. Of course, here we actually get rid of the Tulpa to guarantee that the Bountiful Core activates. And there you see the Surfing Buddy now added to the deck. Especially in matchups like these, where there's like a very weak summon on the opponent's side of the field. A Surfing Body works very well even though you only have a Bountiful Gore yourself. Here we of course go to Baisu because we have bad dice, and the best I think we can really do here is Baisu Burst to keep Nilou safe. After all, our opponent is going to run out of the Janssen Burst stacks here very soon. And here you actually get to see Varessa is very bad if she is the only character alive on your team, because you get no extra value from the Elemental skill and the Apex Drive passive doesn't activate. But that's all information for another video. Let's concentrate on the match itself. Here of course they still have one stack of the kinetic energy scale, so we want to stay on Baisu. And here we see if they have no healing, one skill from Nilou will finish the game. And that is exactly what we will do here. And with that, let's get into the last game of today. Now in this very last match there is actually a couple more changes done to the deck. Instead of Weeping Willows we have Sealies, and instead of Tulpa's talent card we now have Baisu's talent card in the deck. Otherwise there's just some minor tweaks in the whether how many copies of Golden Troop and how many copies of Maiden and how many copies of Gamblers are being used in the deck. So very minor little changes. Our opponent actually running a Bloom deck themselves, but actually with the Kave Nilou combination. Wolf's Greystone coming out round 1, quite scary, but this also means there's not going to be blooms anytime soon from my opponent. Also a quick mention, there are two ways you can play Maiden's Fading Beauty with this deck. Round 1, if your Nilou takes damage, you can play the Maiden's Fading Beauty onto Nilou, because the Baisu summon which heals your active character will heal Nilou, so you get value from playing Maidens onto Nilou. Second is playing it on Tulpa, because Tulpa's passive skill, when the half Tulpas disappear from the field, heal your Hydro Tulpa. So Maidens on Hydro Tulpa, half Tulpa, Hydro Tulpa, quite confusing. The heals from half Tulpas help give more value to Maiden's Fading Beauty if played on to the Hydro Tulpa. And it of course can also be played on Baisu when you burst Baisu, because that usually is in a scenario where Baisu doesn't immediately die, but the effect of this shield that heals you will activate and give more value to Maiden's Fading Beauty. But most often you want to play it onto Nilou round 1 or onto Hydro Tulpa later on in the game. Yeah, anyway, let's follow this game. You can see we did the standard rotation there. There isn't often any times when you do not want to do that combination. Our opponent, I do think going to Kokomi here was a mistake, because they should see the like in this sort of scenario. This is also what I meant, if the opponent doesn't switch characters, you are not going to have a Bountiful Core on the field. But in this scenario, like, they should see that the most optimal thing, or the best thing I can do, is go to Baisu and use a Baisu skill. So why would they go to Kokomi? Also there you see the Baisu talent card. They even use a Kokomi skill, basically giving me a free Bountiful Core. Here I could go for a Tulpa skill, but I actually did do a little bit of calculation, and if it activates either of these summons, it would mean Kokomi would die this round, I think, or is it only with Bountiful Core activation? Anyway, there's the chance that Kokomi would be taken out this round if I do a Tulpa skill, and that would mean Kave would get a bunch of damage because of the Hydro application and the Wolf's Gravestone on the Tulpa, and I do not want that. Not to mention we have full energy on Baisu and the talent card in hand, so we actually stay on Baisu. And here we play the Maidens onto Baisu because we have the healing summon. Oh, and also, even though this is a more aggressive version of the deck, we are still only running one copy of the Fell Dragon because, like mentioned earlier, it takes a bit of time to actually get usage and damage stacks for the dragon, so getting it early is kind of, well, it is wasted most of the time. I mean, you can always play it for a little bit of extra damage, I guess. Here you see we get rid of the Tulpa, healing Hydro, half Tulpa to heal the Hydro Tulpa, and of course get a couple of dice. My dice weren't the greatest there.
Come at me.
And here once again playing the Maidens on the Baisu, giving us more values, and Steep Burst immediately activates. Here we want to keep the half Tulpa more safe. I end up going for the Soothing because they do have the summon on the field, and I, who knows, might end up ending my round on to half Tulpa. Here, because we don't have the greatest of dice, I mean, I do have 2 stacks of Golden Troops reward, but that is still only one skill that I can do with these dice without tuning, so we end up actually playing some of our cards here. This of course pays off because now we have 3 stacks on the Bountiful Core, so that even if it activates as it did there, we still have 2 stacks left. And here I do realize the situation is heavily in my favor if I end my round with the dragon on the field, which is exactly what I end up doing here. And this is one of the reasons why, well, previously in my Fell Dragon deck, I mentioned there are 2 ways of playing the dragon, either as a part of summon deck, and you know, Bloom decks are summon decks, or as a part of a Mawika deck, because Mawika can activate it 100,000 times and wipe the entire team in a second. This is what I would call the more appropriate, the more respectable way of playing the Fell Dragon. I mean, I have 1 copy and the deck isn't revolving around the Fell Dragon, it is merely here as a form of extra damage. And that extra damage, if you can now, well, now if you count the damage our summons will do to the opponent when they pick Nilou, well, I have already won the game. And with that, we've come to the end of the video. I'll see you all next time.